What's going on, guys? Thank you for joining Dr. Andrew Fix back for another episode here on The Code. I say this every time, no matter how you're tuning in, whether it's video, whether it's audio, whatever platform you are listening on. Thank you so much for spending some time and joining us on The Code. Very excited to be bringing another interview to you guys. We have Dr. Torkil Færø joining us all the way from Norway. We got a huge time zone difference between our call today, and we're super excited to bring this conversation to you guys. Torkil, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Andrew. So nice to be on your podcast. I listened to several of your episodes, and it seems to be a lot of interesting subjects that you already know about. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. That you know about HRV and cold plunges, and especially as a physiotherapist, I think there's so many interesting things for me as a doctor, and because exercise and nutrition and the things that you are interested in is so important.
Yeah, totally. And, you started to allude to it, kind of what we're going to get into. But, you guys, I said I'm excited for this episode, but Torkil is a general practitioner, emergency physician in Norway. He's been a physician for many years, and he's the author of a book called The Pulse Cure. And, in that book, they talk about it's the revolutionary new way to balance stress, optimize health, and help you live longer. And we're going to get into the topic of wearables today. And you've heard us talk on this show, if you've listened to it before, about things like the Whoop band or Aura rings or watches that measure your HRV. And if you want to, dive just a little bit deeper or listen to a shorter episode about HRV or heart rate variability, we had one back in February of this year, 2024. But we're going to dive into that more deeply with Torkil here because he's an expert on this topic. And I know it's one that, a lot of the people listening to the show are already interested in and using these metrics to try and improve their health and fitness. So yeah, I guess let's just start there. And Torkil, could you tell us a little bit about your background? How'd you get into medicine? And then how did we get to this point where, you wound up authoring this book, and we're going to be talking about HRV and wearables today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. It's been a long journey. I originally wanted to be a doctor to travel the world because as a doctor, the body is the same anywhere. So I wanted to be able to have the freedom to work anywhere. So that was my aim initially. But then I started working in Norway, and I've been working all over Norway as a locum doctor, you may say. So I've been working in 30, 40 counties in Norway from the north and to the south, having had more than 100,000 consultations for the 25 years that I've been working. And but the reason why I started getting interested in heart rate variability was because I got interested in my own health. Because when we studied medicine, in the 1990s, it wasn't so much focus on lifestyle medicine or what you could do yourself to improve your health and fitness. So I think we maybe thought that if you did everything right, you may live for 2 years longer, but it would take you 2 years, of time to do that. So
Yeah.
so why bother? But then 10 years ago, my father died at 73. And then I thought, okay, I don't want to die at 73. So I want to find out what can I do to live longer and live better. And then I saw that the science had come so much further. We knew so much more about how to stay healthy.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, in medicine, we wait until people get sick before we treat them. I don't really know why that is. Maybe because there's so much money in treating sick people, or maybe. But anyway, I got interested in preventative medicine, what I could do myself. So I was in it for my own sake initially. And then some 5 years ago, I was aware of that you could use wearables and HRV to track your health, your lifestyle changes. And then I just got obsessed with it. And my publisher, I've made a book for them before. It's Norway's biggest publisher. And they got to know that I was using the wearables and asked me if there's a book for us. And then, yes, I thought, yeah, you can write the book. And this is the world's first book on how to use heart rate variability in practice.
Mm.
So so I had to do everything myself, try to figure out, what affects it, and I found out that nutrition affects it a lot, fasting, cold plunges, or cold, anyway, anyhow, cold, and breathing techniques, and so many interesting things that stresses our physiology. And even as a doctor, this was totally a new area.
Yeah.
And I also understood that this touches on the most important things of the day, because what we struggle with as doctors, and the patients, is stress-related diseases. That is, they have fatigue, they have brain fog, they feel tired, they feel on the verge of burnout. And and as a doctor, we don't really have many lab results to track this, but the
Hmm.
heart rate variability will show the strain on the system. So it's really an incredibly important metric for us,
Yeah.
and that is not really known. I think most doctors will not know about the importance of this.
Yeah. I think you end with a very important point right there that I just want to hammer home. Like, if you're spending your time listening to this, like, I hope you really pay attention, because if you go to your traditional physician, your traditional practitioner, they are probably not going to be well equipped to have this type of a conversation with you. Like Torkil just said, it's not it's not something that's well understood within the medical system, because, as he mentioned, we spend so much time and money treating people when conditions are already present, instead of trying to prevent them in the first place. So, and this is a big, like, not that this isn't a treatment conversation, it definitely is, but it's much more of a proactive conversation about how to take control of your health and prevent big time issues from becoming the case in the first place. Can we just start here, Torkil, and let's just talk about what is HRV? Like, what does that mean? What is heart rate variability? And then why is it important? And then we'll hopefully make this conversation a little more tactical for our listeners and talk about, like, how do we improve this number? How can we see it change with different lifestyle habits? And then we'll go down that route. But what is it?
Yeah, heart rate variability is the way that the heartbeats vary between heartbeats. So you would think that is beating very steadily, but that's not the case. If you are in the relaxed state, the parasympathetic state, so this is a measure about the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is connected to what we could call the reptile brain, the very basic of our brain, the system that keeps us going, even asleep and so on, and the system that we share with all vertebrates, even lizards and so on. It's the basic system of the brain, the on and off system. And it's separated into the parasympathetic system, that rest and digest and recovery, and the sympathetic system, the fight, flight, and play and fun as well, the activating, the mobilizing system. And we are made to be quite a lot of the time in the relaxed state. And in the relaxed state, there will be a variation between the heartbeats. When we breathe in, the heart will beat a little bit faster. And when we breathe out, it will beat a little bit slower, because there will be less oxygen in the lungs, and it will just relax a little bit because of that. And it's just measurable in milliseconds. But over a lifetime, it can result in 350 million less heartbeats. So it's
Hmm.
saving quite a lot of energy this way. And when we are in the stressed system, when we are stressed for some reason, then the heartbeat will be very steady at a steady pace, with little variation between heartbeats. So what these watches and wearables do is that they can track these differences and see if we are in the relaxed state or in the stress state. And I can promise you that you will get some surprises from when you are relaxed, because we are not really equipped to feel this. We have extremely good senses with eyesight and hearing and smell and taste and so on. You can taste very, very small differences in temperature and a lot of things, but our heartbeat if you were to guess, you would not feel the difference between 60 beats a minute and 80 beats a minute.
Mm,
You would not feel this, because in ancient times all the threats came from the outside,
yeah.
from lions, from fighting, from enemies, and so on. So the senses inwards towards our own system was not necessary. But in these days, what makes us sick is too much stress. And now we need this sense of our own system, and we don't have it. But the heart and the heart rate will reveal the state of the system. So
Mhm.
that's why it's so important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think now that you say that, I can kind of feel that, right? If you're sitting and your heart rate is 70 or 80 compared to 50 or 60, you don't really feel that. You only notice it if there's a much bigger difference, like you're exercising and your heart rate is much higher compared to resting. Kind of, obviously it's much greater difference that you need to feel it, but it's kind of like temperature in a way, right? If it's Fahrenheit here or Celsius somewhere else, if it's just a small difference in temperature, you don't really feel that. If there's a bigger difference, you do. So you said that when our body, our autonomic nervous system, is functioning more in the parasympathetic state, we're going to have more variability in our heart rates. And having that is going to be better for our system. It's going to help us essentially like conserve energy and conserve heartbeats throughout our life. But when we're in the more sympathetic, the fight or flight state, that heart rate is going to be more consistent. There's going to be less variability between the beats. And there's a time and a place for that, of course. If we need to get blood flow to the body, exercising, or we are in a stressful scenario, you have to, run out of the way of a vehicle or something. But you started to mention, one of the biggest issues facing humans today is it's just chronic overload of stress, right? And there's many reasons for that, whether it's work or other things. But what are some of the things that you have found in your practice or as you've been studying this topic that have seemed to work the best to try and help people start to bring that stress burden down so that we can start putting some, practices into place to combat this issue?
Yeah, there are several things. One is the importance of sleep, that you sleep long enough and that the sleep is restorative, which is not necessarily so. And these devices can reveal whether your sleep was restorative or not. So that's one thing. And then something that surprises a lot of people is food and nutrition. That if you eat a late meal, for example, and especially if it's with a lot of carbs or pizza or junk food, and it will give you stress long into the night. So the role of food in this is important, and that is also why, because a lot of the source of the inflammation in our bodies is because of poor diet, because of ultra processed food, and the ultra processed food is like 60% of the food that we digest. So it's a big problem that is also measurable in the heart rate variability. And what has been very useful for people is it's just to have a monitor that can tell them when they are relaxed,
Yeah.
and that will tell them that you are too stressed, you need to break down, you need to relax, and you can also see. So these wearables is like speedometers for your physiological intensity,
Yeah.
and you will see that in the low intensity that you need to achieve to get into the parasympathetic state is lower. It's in a more relaxed state than you would think. Um, and one of the ways to kind of break down the speed is breathing exercises, to breathe slowly, box breathing, maybe to breathe 6 breaths a minute to really slow it down. And
Yeah.
also cold. I see the cold. If I take a cold shower, I will be in the parasympathetic mode for hours afterwards. So we can hack our system through these basic functions of cold temperature and breath.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And that's one of the phrases like you said, it could be like a speedometer for our physiological intensity. One of the phrases that I like, and probably the main reason that we were talking about off air, wearing a Whoop band. Probably the main reason that I wear it is I like this phrase, what gets measured gets managed, right? And if you track something, you're more likely to actually do something about it. Like you could be aware of an issue, but if you don't have any objective data behind it, sometimes it's hard to make any changes because then you don't see the change take place. And when we can see it, we can feel it, then we grasp onto it a little bit more. And if you have this number or these variables to track or a graph to look at or something, you're going to manage and change and affect that number. Um, Before we dive into some of these different ways to hack our system a little bit more, let's talk about some of the more common wearables that are out there. So we mentioned wearing a Whoop band. What are some of your other favorite devices or ways that you recommend to clients to track these things? What sort of wearables are we talking about?
Yeah, the by far the best one is Garmin watches. They're also probably the cheapest one. I'm sure you could get one for like $100, the cheapest ones they are also good enough. They of course get better the more expensive they get, and and that's because they have the 24-hour graphs that you can see throughout the day and night, whether you are in the parasympathetic or sympathetic mode, and also that you can see in the moment. So you can not just push a button and you see the stress level from
Mm,
0 to 100 in the moment. And that is quite important because then you can feel, how do I feel right now? And you can check, okay, so this is how it is to have a stress of 40, for example. And then you get to know your body better when you can get the measurement of the stress in the moment. So that's Garmin, and it's the reason why Garmin is better is not Garmin in itself, but they have bought algorithms from First Beat Analytics, which is one of the world's best companies regarding physiological measurements. So that's really the thing that separates them. Other than that, I think Whoop is also. I have the Whoop band as well, and the Garmin watch and the Aura ring, and they all. I think they're all good devices.
yeah.
Particularly for sleep, Aura ring is the best. I know that Samsung is soon to be releasing their Galaxy ring, which is probably going to be quite similar to Aura. But then also other watches, you have Apple Watch, you have Coros, you say.
Yeah.
I haven't tested that yet, but most of the watches that tracks, your pulse will have HRV, and then they will have different systems of conveying the information to you.
hmm
So, but by far, really by far, Garmin is the best. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I think those are the top three that I have heard of too, in no particular order. Whoop, Oura Ring, and Garmin's. Being out here in the Denver, Colorado area, pretty much everyone I know has some sort of a watch on their wrist because there's so many people doing active things out in the community. And Garmin is probably the most common one that I see. And I think, would you say, Torkil, that I mean, what's important is you can spend more money, you can get a tracking device that is maybe a little bit higher quality, but just getting something and starting to use this data and use this information is probably the more important part. Just find whatever entry point you want and get something and just start using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, get to know it, get to understand the importance of it. You get insight into your own function so that we have no other way of getting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would really recommend that and to check it out. Many people are afraid that they will be too stressed about it, but that is not my experience. That people maybe will seem strange, or for the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then you get used to it. That you have this speedometer, as you probably could pronounce it better. You have the speedometer on your wrist, and it gets so much easier to see what is good for you and not. And
Yeah.
this will be very individual. So what is good for you, it could be bad for someone else. Like an exercise that is easier for you to do, for another person that is not well trained with a poor fitness level, they may tolerate very, very low strain, and they could be tired for days afterwards, and you will be finished with that, already in the shower, that you are finished with this strain. So and you may tolerate one kind of food because what we have seen a lot of is that people and they detect food intolerances.
Hmm.
So they find that they cannot tolerate gluten or milk or eggs or whatever. Gluten and milk is by far the most common. And then when they stop eating this, then they feel a lot better. Um, they can get rid of symptoms, from their stomach and from joints and from asthma or and rashes and a lot of different symptoms.
Yeah.
So so your heart rate will tell you that something is stressing you. Sometimes you understand clearly what it is stressing you, but you will get a lot of surprises. I'm sure you had some surprises as well.
Yeah, and maybe we should, start to unpack that a little bit and to sort of give my short version of the story. I think it was maybe 2021 when I started wearing a Whoop for the first time. And I'm big on trying to make things efficient and save money. So rather than doing the monthly plan, I bought it for 18 months and just paid up front. So I wore the Whoop for 18 months, and there were some insights that I felt like I learned from looking at the data and some lifestyle changes that I made. And then I took about 1 year off from wearing the Whoop and wanted to see wanted to restart it and see what I felt and see if the data stayed. So then I recently started wearing it again. Well, I say recently, it was probably 6 months ago. I started wearing it again, and with that 1 year gap in between. But I'm curious to hear from your side of things, like when you started wearing a device to track these metrics, what are some of the major takeaways that you learned? Like, what are some of the major lifestyle habits or lifestyle changes that you started to implement that you see really affect these numbers?
Mhm. Yeah, we can take it a bit structured. When it comes to sleep, I understood that I needed to slow down in the evening, turn down the lights, dim the lights, uh, read a book. Because earlier I had thought that, okay, if I work really hard and go to bed really tired, then I will sleep like a log and be very efficient sleep. And then the devices showed me that this was clearly not the case. So that the more that I could go in for kind of a soft landing, that would be a much more efficient sleep. So I would get much better sleep scores, and I would also feel a lot better in the morning. And also to have the bedroom really, really dark. And if I could get it dark enough, to have the sleep mask
Yeah.
over my eyes. So that's what I found out about the sleep. About nutrition, as I said, I found out that if I ate after 7 o'clock in the evening, that would be better for me. And I also found out that if I had even longer night fast, maybe now I have a 6 hour eating window
Hmm.
from 12 to 6. I also found out that that was also good for my HRV and my weight also. Um, so that was good. I found out that alcohol is terrible.
Yeah.
And I tolerate alcohol even worse than other people. So some people tolerate alcohol okay, but for me it's really devastating. So I don't drink. Maybe I drink 3 times a year now.
Mm.
So and other than that, I see that I need to balance my exercise related to the stressors in my life. So if I have a stressful week, I need to slow down on my exercise to maybe run a bit slower and so on. Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's probably the most important, and also take naps. Also, if it has been a lot of stress, and it has really been a lot of stress because the Pulse Cure in Norway has been on the best-selling list for 65 weeks. So it
Ooh,
has just been it has been a roller coaster ride. I've been on probably 70 podcasts and
that's amazing.
TV interviews here and there all the time. And I was not used to it from before I wrote the book. So it has just been an overwhelming success. And now, it's translated into English and Swedish and Danish and Polish and Dutch. And so now I really need to keep my balance. So earlier, this balance, it came naturally, if I didn't do anything in particular. It was calm, but now it's been like being in a tornado. So
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think some of the insights, I was just pulling up my Whoop data here to talk about like sort of what I've seen, but I think it relatively closely mirrors similar to what you said that, you know, I think as a whole, what I see in my recovery scores and everything is that psychological and life stressors impact me more negatively than physical exercise related stressors do. Like I could have a relatively low physical activity day, right, where I'm not really doing a lot that's raising my heart rate, spiking my heart rate from an exercise standpoint. But I could still have a high strain day if I'm just kind of sitting in a higher resting heart rate state because of other stressors that are going on. And because there'll be some days where I have quite a lot of physical activity. I'll get a good night's sleep and I still wake up with like a good score, recovery score the next day. Um, so I think that's one insight that I've learned. Also, similar to what you said, you know, alcohol, particularly late in the day, really tanks my sleep score and tanks the recovery score the next day. I think some of the big changes I've made related to alcohol is if I do choose to drink alcohol, I'll typically limit that to 2 drinks, and I'll try to do that before 5 p.m. in the evening, so that there's a few hours before I go to bed. And my wife and I usually, prior to the arrival of our son, we try to go to bed around 9:30 most nights. That's been pushed back a little bit now, but and then I've switched to non-alcoholic options, like if I want something other than water or coffee or something like that, because we tend to not drink very many sugary drinks. And then I think the one that I've had the hardest trouble with, which does seem to negatively impact my score, but if I monitor the amount, not as much, is that late meal, like you mentioned. If I eat too close to bedtime and your body is still trying to digest, that's something that I have seen sort of affect particularly the first half of the night of sleep, not being quite as restful and a little bit more up and down. Um, but I think those are the major things that I've seen. But I think some of the habits that I've put into place, reading, trying to, I'd love to, maybe we'll get on the topic of ice baths a little bit, but that's something that, I have found, whether or not I'm even looking at the data that the Whoop or the watch tells me, is I just feel so much better throughout the day for the next several hours. If I do a cold shower or take a cold plunge, it just does something to my mood and my mental state, and I just feel so much better. So, pretty similar. And I would imagine most people listening to this would, have similar experiences, but everybody's score is going to be unique to them, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's one thing that I see too, is my HRV relative to some of my peers tends to be very low. Like I think, let's see, what am I sitting right now? Mine today is sitting at a 32, and that's
Mm,
fairly normal for me. I sit in like the low 30s. A high number for me will be in the high 30s, maybe 40, and a low number for me will be in the somewhere in the 20s. And from a fitness standpoint, like I feel pretty fit, but rarely do I see a number higher than 40.
yeah,
I know other
and you
people.
probably know that some of the people that you train and guide who could have HRVs of like 70 or 80 or even 100.
Totally. Yeah.
So the number of the HRV is a lot of it is genetic, so that you have a certain set point, and you should really not compare it to others. You should compare it to your own level, so that you can see that the most important is that you know that you are able to have like 40 on a good day, and to know that, okay, this is what you could aim for to have most of your days,
Yeah.
and that you know that if you are down at 20 something, that you are strained and need to take action towards that.
Yeah.
And so you will find everybody should just find their own level, and see how can they get their HRV as good as possible, or within reason. So yeah, so not to compare it too much to other people, I would say
Yeah.
is important. And you can probably do you know your VO2 max? Can you see that from your watches?
I don't see it on my watch, but I actually had it tested when was this? This was probably 9 months ago, and it was, man, I want to say it was in the mid 50s.
All
I think
right. Yeah.
I think
So
it was
yeah.
like in the pretty high percentile. Like it was a pretty good. And I don't do a lot of long steady state cardio like cycling or anything, but I do a lot of HIIT training. So yeah,
Mhm.
my VO2 max is pretty good.
Yeah. So that shows that even if your HRV is a bit on the low side compared to others, you have a really good VO2 max. So I have 44 in VO2 max, and I have a little bit higher HRV than you. So there you can see that you should really, just concentrate on your own HRV and not compare it to others. So that because that's a very common question. So I
Yeah.
think that's important to know.
Yeah, I think that is.
So and it's also important to know your VO2 max. So particularly to find the level of training. So I find that people who have a VO2 max of maybe 30, 32, 33, they cannot tolerate as much exercise. If they do a HIIT workout, they can be tired for days.
Hmm.
Probably because of the lactic acid buildup.
Yeah.
That's my guess. I can see that the more lactic acid that they get, the more strain and the longer recovery time they need.
Mm-hmm.
So the VO2 max level is very important, and it's also probably the most important metric for longevity.
Yeah.
So to have a good VO2 max is important.
Yeah, let's go on deeper on that just a little bit. So like, what is the VO2 max just to make sure everybody understands, and then like how does that relate to longevity? Because I feel like maybe I've
Yeah.
touched on that on this show, but not really in depth. And
Mm.
I feel like it's becoming more common out here in the Denver, Colorado area that I'm seeing facilities offering VO2 max testing. And I would say out here in terms of like US dollars, I'm pretty much seeing that anywhere from, I don't know, we'll call it $150 up to $300. And
Mm.
depending on the person, you may say that that's expensive, but since this is a measure that is closely linked with longevity, I think it's money well spent, because it could give you some
Yeah.
valuable insights.
Then you can save all the money for the Garmin watch because the Garmin watch will tell you the VO2 max, and I also tested it with real life VO2 max, and it's similar,
Hmm.
and it's also what I hear from other people.
Okay,
So
cool.
from the Garmin watches, you will also get uh, an estimate of your VO2 max, that is pretty accurate. And what VO2 max is a metric on how efficient is your body in dealing with oxygen, and how efficient are your mitochondria, how efficient are your lungs. So if you have a good VO2 max, you kind of have a smooth system,
Hmm.
uh, so that will work very efficiently. So you can tolerate a lot of stress, a lot of strain. If you have a good VO2 max, you have efficient cells in your body, efficient muscles, efficient lungs. And then it's like, yeah, you can compare it to driving a car that you could drive for, 50 miles an hour in a low gear or in a high gear. And having a low VO2 max is like driving, with a high RPM,
Yeah.
with a low gear. So it's more strain on your body at the same speed as others.
Hmm.
So you will sleep more efficiently while you are asleep. The body is better at recovering because it doesn't have to spend so much energy just on the metabolism. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's what we see with people, right? We out here we have so many clients in our office or like friends and connections that they are ultra marathoners or they're cyclists and they're people that have high VO2 max scores, and we do see that they just seem to recover much better from physical activity. While we're on the topic of oxygen, one of the things that we were briefly chatting about before we hit record, pertinent to this area, is how our HRV is impacted by where we live or where we travel to, right? And particularly out here in the mountain area, like if somebody spends time in Denver, which we're sitting at about 1 mile, 5,280 feet above sea level, and then they go up to the mountains, for example, and then they're at 8, 9, 10,000 feet. What have you seen, and what does the data tell us happens when we change our elevation and our altitude as it relates to HRV?
Yeah. So when you go to a higher altitude that you're not acclimatized to, say that if I go to Denver at your altitude, it will be a big strain on my body. Not on yours because you will be acclimatized to it. So my HRV will be lower. My body will struggle more to maintain the functions, day and night. And then if I go back again to the lowlands, it will improve. So we have just had the Easter holiday. I've been to the mountains, and I could see that effect on my HRV. So when I got back here into the lowlands, it bounced back, and I had like 55 in HRV last night, which is kind of a super compensation, it's called. After
Okay.
a strain, the body will compensate a lot as it gets the tense.
Hmm.
And you, from Denver, when you go all the way up into the high mountains, it will be the same for you. So it will be a more strain to be there. There's less oxygen, and your body has to work harder to do the same job up in the mountains. And actually, Whoop, they gather information from their customers, from their clients, and Whoop says that altitude actually is the second most important stressor,
Hmm.
or the second strongest stressor, where number three is disease and number one is alcohol, and
Interesting.
then altitude is actually there in the middle.
Got
Probably
it.
because in the States, you have the Rockies and you have higher altitude differences than in Norway.
Sure.
But it's visible even at the altitude I was on was maybe a half a mile.
Okay.
Yeah. It would be 800 meters. That's probably
Yeah,
half a mile. Yeah.
I would say so.
Mm. So
Yeah, that's
even that is measurable, and the interesting thing is it measures. The heart rate is so sensitive. You can see these small differences that elude you. You would not know until you're like on Mount Everest or in the base camp. In the high Himalayas. But the heart rate will detect these small differences of stress on your body, and that makes it so much easier to maneuver, to kind of become the CEO of your own health, that you have the control, you have the speedometer for this, and can adjust accordingly, so that you know that if you go up to the altitudes, it will be a strain on your system. So maybe you can compensate by sleeping a bit longer, avoiding alcohol. You can do these other things to compensate the strain.
yeah. Yeah, and it's good to like know that and understand that a bit too, because if for no other reason, I think sometimes it can help people give themselves a little bit of grace, or give themselves a break. Because I think sometimes, particularly if somebody is, we see this a lot if we have somebody travel out here to visit us, right? And then their body is not used to the altitude. And then especially if we go up to the mountains, they may be laboring a little bit, they're breathing, they need to take more rest breaks. And sometimes those people get frustrated and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that, I need to stop and take a breather. But it's not something that you don't need to apologize for it. You don't need to get down on yourself about it, because like you just said, even if you're just being there and living and you're not even doing anything physical, our body is working harder just to do the same thing because of that strain based on the altitude and less oxygen. So it really makes sense when you boil it down, but
Mm.
sometimes we don't think about that stuff if we don't have the numbers to back it up.
Yeah.
And I
And in
yeah,
general, as you say, that it's also that the watches and devices will tell you to relax is also kind of a license to rest, because a
yeah,
lot of people feel guilty if they don't do something all the time, so they feel guilty about it. So a lot of people tell me that one of the advantages of the watches is that it's a it's another thing that tells you relax, you deserve to relax, or you should relax because there's been so much strain on you. So,
Yeah.
this is particularly women, I must say, so that really feel guilty if they're not doing like everything perfect all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think I fall into that category a little bit. I feel the need to always be doing something, but yeah, I think we all are going to respond, like you said, respond different to different activities. And, one person may see one response in their body compared to someone else. And, we know that to be true if we really think about it. People respond to different types of training and respond differently to stress. But something we started to talk about was cold immersion, whether that's cold water or whether that's just cold temperatures in general. Um, and you had mentioned that if you look at your data and you do a cold shower, you see that your stress level is down for a period of several hours. So like, what have you seen as far as cold immersion goes? And let's specifically talk about cold showers and cold plunges because that is a very hot topic, hot topic now, cold topic.
Mhm.
But I know it's something that our clients are doing, and I know it's something that people are very curious about. Should they implement it in their life? And then if you could touch on like what sort of a protocol or prescription are you using? Like, are you doing this for a couple minutes, or is it 5 minutes or 30 seconds? Let's touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I use cold showers more or less every time I take a shower. Unless it's in the evening, then I would tend not to do it because then it can create stress a little bit into the night, actually.
Yeah.
So, and particularly I'm careful to do it after I've been running or doing some exercise. So what I do is just shower as normal, and then on the last 2 minutes, I just turn it all the way to the coldest.
Yeah.
I even have a gauge in the shower that I can see the temperature. So usually 2 minutes on the coldest is good enough for me. Um, if you do that, they say, Susanna Söberg is kind of the guru on the topic. She's been on Huberman Lab and many
Yeah.
other places. She says that like 11 minutes a week
Yep.
is good enough. So then if you do it, 4 times a week, 2 or 3 minutes, that should be fine.
Yeah.
Um, the colder, the better, or the more. There's like a function between temperature and time. So the colder, the shorter time you need. And
Yeah.
if it's a bit warmer, okay, all you need to do is take the shower a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the temperature in the sea, so that from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 60 degrees is fine. You can get the same effect, but you would need to stay longer in the water if it's 60 degrees. You,
Right.
you may need to be there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get the same effect as maybe 1 minute from 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
And do you know roughly what temperature, the number 45 or something degrees Fahrenheit is sort of sticking in my head about that 11 minutes per week? Do you know roughly what temperature that is for that kind of prescription of 11 minutes per week?
Mm,
I think it's somewhere in that neighborhood that you just mentioned, like 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit.
mm. No, I don't really remember the exact in Celsius, but 5 degrees Celsius would be fine.
Okay.
So, and that is probably 45
Yeah, I
Fahrenheit, I
think
would
I think that
guess.
checks out pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I've found for myself too. Like I have found that, if the water is about 45 degrees, because I have a ice bath here at our house that I will occasionally use. And I found that, like, for me, that seems to be a nice balance, that 45 degrees Fahrenheit, where it's cold enough that I definitely feel the benefits, but it's not so frigid cold that I really dread getting into it. Um, I have used a couple um, like cooled or insulated circulating cold plunge devices that were set at like 38 degrees Fahrenheit. And woof, I will tell you, there is a pretty drastic difference between 38 degrees and 45 degrees. And, you really have to talk. I find myself having to talk myself into getting in that water. And then I stay in there for 2 or 3 minutes. I feel great, but it was a chore to get into that cold water.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's always uncomfortable. And that is why it's so good with the watches. They can they can show you the effect of it afterwards, that your pulse goes down and you're more rested. So you get the adrenaline kick as well. So you get like hyper focus. You get the adrenaline and the parasympathetic mode. So that is why you feel so good afterwards for some hours.
Yeah.
So and cold is also important in the night. So the hotter your bedroom is, the worse the recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that from 15 to 18 degrees centigrades is good for the bedroom. I think that would be like 55 degrees and a bit lower than that. Um, and you can see that then on your HRV, that if it's cooler the bedroom, then it's better. And I know a lot of people in the States, they have this 8 sleep.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've heard of that. Hmm.
yeah, so that will regulate the temperature with the mattress. So that could be one way to do it. So and heat is a big stressor. So in the heat, in the summer, you can also, like you say, show grace, because it will be such a strain on your system. The body works so hard to get rid of the heat. Your pulse goes up. And then it can be particularly useful to cool yourself down. You can put your hands under the faucet to,
Yeah.
to get your hands cold. That's also effective. So you can do many of these tricks to cool yourself down, and that will give you a better HRV.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And, just to put some of those numbers in perspective, Torkil said 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. So that basically translates to, says 59 to 64 and a half degrees Fahrenheit. And I know we've talked a lot about that, like low 60s degrees or 65 degrees kind of being the ideal sleep temperature. So that tracks and measures out there. And then you just started to get on the topic of like, spilling heat and letting heat expel from your body, particularly through the palms, the feet, and hairless sections of our face. And we've had a couple conversations on this podcast about palmar cooling and how we can utilize that as a performance tool, performance aid to cool down our body during exercise or during especially warm environments. And we're starting to see that become more and more popular. Actually, I was watching the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament, and a couple of the teams are using these palm cooling devices on the sidelines during timeouts and during rest breaks, commercial breaks, and things to try and cool their body down. So heat, like you just mentioned, is a big stressor on our body. We see that during, I believe it was a major marathon here in the United States in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area in Minnesota was actually canceled either last year or the year before because of the temperature and the humidity being unseasonably warm. And they just didn't want to have recreational runners out there who are not the elite level competitors, not maybe adapted for that training, run a race in a weather that was unseasonably warm. So they actually decided to move that race or cancel it for that same reason. So no, I think this conversation, is so relevant to all the people that are tuning and listening. I guess what I would just love, you've talked about sleep, we talked about nutrition being an impact on these HRV scores, and particularly the processed food and the harder our body has to work to process something, the more stressful that is to our system. And the more natural whole foods we eat, the better that's going to be. And then we started to talk about cold plunging or cold immersion being ways that we can see this number improve. Let's just touch on the breathing one more time because we briefly mentioned it. You had mentioned box breathing, doing maybe 6 breaths per minute and really slowing that down. But are there any other breathing practices that you've recommended to people that you see being particularly beneficial that people can take as an easy takeaway to implement after this?
I think the easiest is the best. So just slow it down. I think that 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out is a good one. So that will keep the breath down to 6 breaths a minute. If you just do it, between phone calls, before a meeting, that you get it to be a routine, a habit, then that's important. That you catch yourself doing it
Yeah.
multiple times during the day. So you don't have to do it like for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, just 1 minute, 2 minutes, can be enough. And because the breath is in the autonomic nervous system, you will breathe without thinking about it, of course. But it's also the one part of the autonomic nervous system that you have a lever into. So by slowing down the breath, you slow down the intensity of the autonomic nervous system. So it's a way to trick this old system into believing that it's calm around you.
Yeah.
So this very old system that we have inherited, I call it a living fossil because it's remnants from our past, 100 million years ago. And the evolution is such that it cannot take down a system. So it's almost like we have a Tesla brain, on a T-Ford basic. And we have to take that into consideration. So and the tiny old parts of the brain that regulates the system, it listens to our breath, it listens to our anxiety, our worries, and will modulate the immune system, the amount of inflammation in your body according to that.
Okay.
So if you are lonely, if you are anxious, if you are worried, um, this used to be situations before a war, before a conflict, before hard times. And then the immune system is not waiting passively for something to happen. This would be precursors to events that would lead to infections.
Mm.
So the immune system will step up the inflammation to prepare for that. And it is made for relaxing, the minute the danger is over, it's made to step back. But now with the constant stress in our society, it will not step back. And this is what creates the low-grade chronic inflammation that is the root cause of almost all the diseases that we see in the doctor's office. And by doing these things, cold therapy, relaxing, sleeping better, avoiding food that is bad for you and that creates the inflammation in your intestines, then you cut the chances of getting these lifestyle diseases, and including in the lifestyle diseases is cancer, heart disease, dementia, Parkinson, and autoimmune diseases. So it's a lot to gain. It said that heart rate variability, you can almost Google any disease or a symptom with heart rate variability, and you will find a connection.
Mm.
And it said that the heart rate variability is connected to 9 out of the 10 most important deadliest diseases in the States. Actually, the 1 out of the 10 is road accidents.
Sure.
But all the other big killers is related to HRV.
You know what? And that's so interesting because, we know heart disease and cancer are on these lists, but even back to the chronic stress, and we know our constantly being connected world, phones and even, watches that have messages on them and things, like we know that these are some of the things that contribute to are constantly being a little bit overstressed, where we're constantly checking social media and things. Well, what we also know is those things contribute to auto accidents quite a lot, people being distracted on their phones. And if constantly being stressed and being in a state that's more close to that sympathetic nervous system could be affecting some of our reaction time or our ability to make decisions, you might even be able to extrapolate that HRV is linked to that too. And if you're in a more calm, relaxed state, you're able to process things a little bit more clearly as they come, and you're not quite so wound up. That probably contributes two, less auto accidents. And of course, we know if people are underslept and living off of caffeine or drinking a lot of alcohol, that's going to impair things too. So whether the data shows it or not, it probably contributes to all 10 out of 10 of those top causes of death. I think what you just mentioned as you were um, talking about how our breath can be a hack into the autonomic nervous system is in a way to trick our system into like calming down, slowing things down. Even if, there's fires burning all around you, you can control the breath to some degree, and then that can impact your body. We talk a lot about things that we can do, like what supplements can I take, what exercise can I do, what things can I do to try and improve my health. But if we don't first look at some of these like very basic things and master the basics first, I kind of think of it like, we're trying to drive with the brake on, right? And it's like if we can just focus on the basics first, focus on our breath, getting good food, focusing on our sleep, at the end of the day, that's going to be the best way to positively impact our health anyways, way better than any supplements or any what other things you can do to try and hack the system. Those are a much smaller percentage that unless you're doing those other things, you probably don't even need to entertain those.
Yeah, I'm sure. And the important things is that and all the advice in the Pulse Cure in the book is they're free, or they're even cheaper than the alternative. Fasting is of course cheaper than eating, and sleeping is free, breathing exercise is free, cold showers, even cheaper. And nature, rest, less alcohol. So, the good things that keeps you healthy, they're free. But you also see when talking about supplements, we also see that if you are low on vitamin D and low on vitamin B12, for example, and iron for menstruating women, it could also be low on iron. Then the HRV will be lower. And often, when they get the supplements, they can see that their HRV will improve. So I would say an advice, if you see that your HRV is low and is stressful all the time, and this you would see easier on the Garmin watches than other devices. If you see that the stress level is high throughout the day and night, then I would go to the doctor, check if you lack some of these vitamins, and also to check if you have some food intolerance, because that seems to be very common if you see that you have stress that you cannot solve yourself when you do the different hacks in the Pulse Cure. So yeah, and so definitely vitamin D and B12 is quite common that they are low.
Yeah, that's good. And we're definitely going to put a link to where people can find that book in the show notes. But what I'd also love for you to share before we start the process of, kind of winding down and wrapping things up is what would be the best place for people to find you. We'll include these things in the show notes for this podcast. But like, where can people get in touch with you and find you online?
Yeah, we have a social website called thepulsecure.com. And I'm also on Instagram. I'm Dr. _Torkil MD. So on Instagram. I have just recently started the English speaking Instagram and the pulsecure.com. So we've had the Norwegian ones for some time that are quite big, but the English ones is not developed so much yet. But there I share information, I share curves, share advice, and the pulsecure.com is a social website where you can put out questions. You can put out pictures of the Garmin curves or other devices that you have, and get information from other people. So it's based on that people help people. So in Norway we have more than 4,000 members, and we are also now these days implementing the pulsecure.com, the English speaking social website.
Awesome.
So and the book they can get anywhere. It's in the US. It's available as an ebook and an audiobook already, but the paperback version will be out in mid-May. So So that will be exciting. And I think that the US, a lot of the devices that work, like Whoop and Garmin, that's American products. So I think that the US with their technology I think they will understand the importance of it. And this is still, I talked on the heart rate variability podcast a couple of days ago, and I asked him because he knows the most. Is there any other book that is like this, like a guidebook on how to use HRV? He said no, still not, which is just incredible because these devices, are so common, and there's not really a good guidebook on how to use it and to connect it to the lifestyle strategies that we know is healthy for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is awesome. And I think I believe you guys had sent me a draft copy of the book, but I'm gonna go get I listen to audio all the time. I'm gonna go get my hands on a copy of the book myself and dive into it a little bit more. As of the recording of this, early April 2024. So that paperback or hard copy book will be coming out in not too distant future. So we encourage you guys
Then
to.
you can pre-order. You can pre-order, of course. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we encourage you guys
Yeah.
to get your hands on a copy of this book because what we do know is, at least in my opinion, knowledge is not power without implementation. And if you can get some of this information and you can start to put these practices into place, they can be very powerful ways to impact your health for the positive direction. And if you're not already using one of these devices, whether it's a Garmin watch, a Whoop, an Oura ring, to track and measure some of these metrics, I really encourage you to do so because it can be very eye-opening to start to become aware of some of the things that affect how you feel and how your body responds, and then put some small practices into place to see those numbers change. And then it's kind of like a snowball effect in a positive way. You start to feel and see the changes taking place, and then you just want to keep doing it because you really are aware of and feeling how much better and different you feel. So I thought this conversation was great. And I think hopefully our listeners really appreciate and, you know, just really value the insight that we got into. I really appreciate your time I was going to say
Mhm.
this morning for me, evening for you.
Yeah. It's been very, very nice. And there's one more thing I would like to mention,
Yeah, let's do
and
it.
that is regarding women and menstruation, and that is that the week before menstruation for many women is a really hard physiological strain that is visible in the HRV. So that this week you should not train as hard, and you should not you should compensate for the stress that is on your system. So it's not that you feel irritable. It's not just a mood. It's not just a feeling. We can see on the HRV, on the dip of the HRV, that it is as hard as getting a COVID infection, actually getting a quite tough infection. I can see the same dip on the curves from the week before menstruation. So that is important, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I think that's another area probably where there's just not as enough information out there on it. Like you said, this book is one of the only one that gives you sort of a blueprint and a guide to track and use this HRV to make these lifestyle changes. So I
Mm.
do think that's a huge piece to mention. I'm glad you brought that up. If you guys have questions on this stuff, please use the information that's in the show notes and get in touch with us at the Code or Physio Room. Get in touch with Torkil and get your questions asked and answered. And it sounds like that, the website that we'll put in there is a huge hub for community and people communicating and talking to other people about what they're finding and what they're doing. And we know that can be hugely beneficial. So again, Torkil, I really appreciate your time hopping on the Code
Mm.
podcast. And yeah, just thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so nice to have this conversation with someone that is so knowledgeable about the subject. So I'm very grateful for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, best of luck with the ongoing popularity of the book and all the conversations and interviews that you're doing. Thank you for spending your time with us. And again, for all you guys that tuned in to listen to the code, whether it's your first episode or you've joined us for 100 plus, thank you so much for spending your time here. If you've not already done so, a review would go a long way on this podcast. We are trying to get up to 200 5-star reviews just so we can get this out to more and more people and see people positively optimize and impact their health through the information on this show. So thank you in advance for that. And be sure to tune in the future. We'll catch you guys on another episode of The Code. Thanks so much.